Welcome to another episode of the Reboot Chronicles, a no-holds-barred forum with global leaders, authors, entrepreneurs, and CEOs about how organizations stay focused on growth and innovation in unprecedented times. I'm your host, Dean DeBias, coming to you live from Reviv's North American headquarters in Chicago, and we would like to thank you for joining us from around the globe today. Today we're talking about humanizing AI experiences with the global thought leader and senior managing partner at IBM Services, Jesus Mantas. Jesus, welcome.
Thank you, Dean.
You know, most people don't know this, but after 100 years, IBM is still one of the world's largest tech and consulting companies with over $77 billion of revenue, about 350,000 people, size of a country. And like Microsoft, IBM has been shifting away from traditional hardware and software into cloud solutions, AI, and also acquiring its way into open source services with a $34 billion acquisition of Red Hat a while back. Jesus, maybe just to start out, tell us a little bit about your role, about driving growth and innovation and change inside such a large, older, and prestigious company, but one that's really gone through a pretty big transformation over the last 5 years.
Sure. What I do every day is I'm responsible for the strategy decisions of the services portion of IBM. It's about 63% of the IBM company. And this is where we have all of the capabilities to really do the transformation using technology, both IBM technology and non-IBM technology, right? So it has
Right.
both the business services side and the technology side. I'm responsible for, broadly defined innovation, which is how do we package those capabilities into offerings? Which platforms do we use to deliver those offerings? And any kind of assets that enhances what our people can do. And the corporate development side, which is, how do we look at the ecosystem? How do we engage with the ecosystem? Where do we acquire? Where do we partner? As well as the thought leadership umbrella, which we have in a unit called the IBM Institute for Business Value.
Which is pretty substantial in itself. Maybe we'll get to that one in a little bit. So you touched on one of my hot buttons, obviously, co-creation of innovation. Some companies have figured it out, others haven't. I know you, so I know you've figured it out in most of your units. We run this program called Dancing with Startups that helps companies figure out what should they build, what should they buy, what should they borrow, meaning partnering. On the buy side, IBM has been very selective in acquisitions over the last, call it 5-10 years, and rightfully so. And you find one you want, you make a big move. But is acquisitions we'll get into the build and borrow stuff in a bit. But is acquisitions going to be a bigger part of the future? It just seems like that's what everyone is doing now in terms of acquiring innovation. So whether it's Amazon or Microsoft or Google or you name it, SAP, Salesforce, lots of activity going on there. How do you guys view it since the acquisition of Red Hat, which was a pretty transformative deal for you?
Yeah, I mean, acquisitions has been and will continue to be one of the levers for us to keep working on the portfolio. So you will see us exercising, sometimes in big chunks, as you saw recently. Sometimes, prior to Red Hat, we have done the prior 5 years, we have done over 100 acquisitions, right? So it really depends what we're looking at. It is one lever, but it's not the only lever. Remember, we invest over $5 billion on a unit called IBM Research, where we really make grand challenges and we really go after big problems, and that becomes a source of innovation that complements anything that we can do, organically into the business, as well as the things that we can acquire. I think what you can bet on is we really have, for the last 20 years, people may not realize this, but for over 20 years, IBM has been one of the biggest sponsors of the Linux Foundation and open source. So you would think is like, whoa, wait a minute. So we actually believe that open is an element of the future. And that's where it's not only acquisitions, but the relationships with the ecosystems are going to be a fundamental element of what we do, in addition to continue to boost our own, research where, remarkable achievements such as the quantum computer are coming to ecosystem plays and of course, acquisitions. And all of this it requires a culture that then enables you to put all of these different pieces together for a given purpose that adds value to a client, right? So this just becomes fragmented. You may be doing a lot of acquisitions, but it may be very hard to put them together and achieve a purpose. Last 2 years, we've been working on what I would say is a cultural change in the IBM company, and we have standardized on something that we call the IBM Garage, which is the mechanism by which we engage with clients and we engage with the ecosystem and really orchestrate all of these components to make sure that what we do is not only innovative, but it can actually scale. It can actually create impact and scale. We have seen many of our clients and many other people that they score very well in the invention side of innovation, but they struggle then to take this and saying, but what impact are you making? And are you making that impact at scale, right? So we've really modeled this IBM Garage to make sure that we have the innovation, but with the purpose of impact and scale.
Yeah, it's one of the first things I teach students at Kellogg, which is what's the difference between an invention and innovation? So they kind of get that going, which is, the innovation is actually, people are actually using it. But that's not business innovation, which is it's got to have a financial return and people willing to pay for it. But in the case of open source, it's not always being paid for. So that definition is changing. So I just say there has to be a business model wrapped around it where it makes sense for the enterprise to make a big enough impact. So Red Hat, that's open source, right?
Well, I think Red Hat is remarkable as you said, open source is a great thing with the exception that is not a great business model to just give away stuff for free, right? It's very hard to make money when you're giving away for free. So one of the many remarkable features of Red Hat as a company and Jim and the team as leaders is what Red Hat has done is they have been able to they're one of the most active participants on the open source community. So they basically have their fingers in the over 3 million projects that are out there with people just generating ideas. But they have a very unique and highly successful machine to then take that innovation and turn it into commercial products. And what would say was like, well, wait a minute, what is the difference between something that I can get for free and the same thing, quote unquote, same thing as a commercial product? And I say, well, the difference is if you're a company and you're going to use that in a mission critical, open source is not supported. So the next version of open source, it could break something. It may no longer work. It may eliminate features. And you may have built a lot of critical business logic on top of that, and you're out of luck.
Exactly.
Where Red Hat has done is taking that innovation. So you're not giving up on the innovation, but it actually ensures the security of it. It ensures the maintainability. It ensures that they'll be the first ones that it will run in any hardware where this piece of Linux can do. And frankly, they have created not only they have 80% market share of the paid Linux, which just says something, but they have created a remarkable set of tools for the next generation of Linux architectures that are powering the cloud, right? Like Kubernetes and their OpenShift architecture. So I think they have done a better than average job, if I can say, a big understatement, taking open source, but make it commercially viable.
Yeah, they've kind of set up platform as a service, and the reason they protected the core, aren't their roots more in cybersecurity? I mean, they literally invented some of the early stuff. If you go back to their genesis, they seem to have taken the right approach. You want to talk about AI? That was kind of the teaser of this episode.
Happy to talk about AI anytime.
I know you and I have different perspectives on AI, which is good. Both you and I teach it and try to get companies to adopt it and involved in companies that use it. So a couple stats that we usually kind of throw out in the program. So Gartner is representing that 40% of firms are using AI. There's a higher percentage of CEOs and C-level people that have it part of their strategic plan, but in terms of companies that are really using it systemically, I think it's probably a little bit lower. Forecasts from all of the organizations are all over the place. Anywhere from 20 to 40 billion by 2025 is the size of the AI market. I'm not sure what they're actually counting in AI, but it's like anything else. It's like IoT. The forecasts there were off the charts until people started breaking it down. And the applications is, everything from cost savings to increasing revenue to running things autonomously. But just for everybody out there that may not be experts at this, which is almost everybody. What is AI? What's the big deal?
Yeah, I think if we would have another shot at this, we would call it something different than AI. I think the first problem
It's
with
never
what
too late.
AI
We can rename it right here.
is the name. If I would give it a name, and of course, coming from an engineering background, this may or may not resonate, but in the same way as computers operate with numbers, I would say AI is non-numbers computing. So think about words. If you want to do some kind of computing, but there's not with numbers, it's with words. Well, that's what AI does. If you want to process images, do imaging processing to either recognize things or see patterns or detect things, you use AI. If you want to analyze sounds, if you want to analyze video, if you want to analyze this, think of everything that is not a number that we humans deal with all the time. We see a tree, we don't see numbers, we see a tree, we see objects, we understand words, we create concepts. AI is the technology that allows a computer to do all of that. So what does that mean? Well, it allows to both understand text and create text. So therefore, it can communicate in the same language that a person does. It can also, by the way, read, in about 3 seconds, 3 million medical papers and distill patterns, because it applies what a computer does, which is scale things.
Right.
But instead of doing it with numbers, it does it with words. It can do the same thing with images. It can, learn from millions of images and then be able to differentiate in the same way we as kids, when we learn that that animal is a cat, well, we now know it's a cat. We're not trying to depict, the color features. No, it's a cat, right? So that is what I would say. If somebody wants to know what AI is not intelligence. It is definitely artificial, but it's more this mechanism to have computers to deal with things that they're not necessarily numbers, in addition to numbers, right? AI can also deal with numbers.
Exactly. And most people don't know it's been around since the 50s, like most core technology invented by the government or practiced by the government, and it has gone through different evolutions. But is it at a perfect storm right now because computing power is so strong, smartphones are so capable, you've got haptics, you've got vision, you've got everything from hearing and sensing, and so all kind of coming together with this perfect storm where the AI in the background can actually do more now? Like the camera I'm looking at, it's a pretty high-res camera, lots of capabilities there. What is this, because it's a perfect storm? It's finally taking off, and the business applications are just more applicable now, or more human.
It is, and it's easier to adopt, and it will become. I mean, think about it. We have seen this in technology before, right? So the internet, TCP/IP, came from military applications with the attempt to create systems that they would be resilient to an attack, and therefore they connected to each other's, and
Right.
they could just connect to each other and scale without human intervention, and that became the internet, and the internet became pervasive, and we no longer do statistics or studies that say, well, let's just see how many companies use internet. It's like obvious. I think we're at the same cycle on AI. I think very soon we'll stop making some of these studies that say, well, how many companies use AI? Because frankly, every person that has a phone is using AI, right?
Exactly.
The majority of the phones out there, if when you're going to take a picture, you're using AI. So the algorithm that is trying it draws this little green box around a face, and it adjusts the lighting so the face is going to look better. Well, that's an artificial intelligence, algorithm in the majority of the cameras. So it's just going to get pervasive, to your point, because it has become cheap, it has become reliable, and therefore it can be applied to a lot of different use cases with a lot of effort. Now, the main requirement, and I think the big difference between consumer and business application is, think of this other analogy. An AI algorithm is like a jet engine, right? Is the engine. It's something that has a lot of power, but it requires a highly distilled fuel for that engine to work. If you would just take like crude oil out of the ground and put it onto a jet engine, that jet engine will not. That plane is not going anywhere. You need to distill that crude oil. You need to create very specific kerosene that you're going to put into that jet engine, and you have amazing power. That is the main element of AI. AI is the engine, but the data is the fuel. The main blocker of broader adoption of that engine AI is having more ready fuel available that can fuel that engine.
And it's literally fueling not just new companies, but new industries. Little websites like Hopper that allows you to predict exactly when you should buy an airline ticket. That algorithm's been thrown off a little bit with COVID, but new categories that had never been around before. Revive, the sponsor of this program, is a simple, you mentioned taking a photo as AI. So that's a company that took that platform and said, how do we take a photo of someone's face and then recommend, of the thousands of beauty products out there, or skincare or sun care or supplements, which one should you take based on everything going on in your environment and your analysis of your own skin and body? It's crazy. What are some of your examples?
Yeah, I mean, we focus obviously in business to business, right? So mostly
Sure.
the applications that we focus on fall like a few categories. Top of my head, virtual agents, especially with COVID-19. Think about it. You have 30 million people that need information or need to process something or need to figure out what to do or not to do, and it could overwhelm any system. So having virtual agents that can 24/7, and we've used it even in hospitals where we just translated the actual medical protocols, where, for example, in a children's hospital at the peak of COVID-19, the last thing you want to do is bring your child to a hospital, which is a high risk maneuver, to take medical resources if your child actually doesn't need to be there. So how do you create virtual agents that have the same reliability as a human person, but can attend 24/7 millions of people that a human couldn't do? Virtual agents across everywhere to help employees, to help clients, to help everybody. Discovery, right? So how do you basically see patterns? One of the things that I think this pandemic has shown us as well is you have to go and analyze your supply chain much more granularly, right? It's not enough to say we have enough masks in the United States. No, because you may have a state that they don't have any, and you may have a state that have a stockpile. So this idea of creating more hyper local predictions of demand for products has been felt by everybody in the supermarkets. And that is a perfect example of AI. As I said, AI can process both numbers as well as non-numbers, and it can do it based on not only history, which is what the statistics give you, but based on patterns that it can learn. So you can basically correlate and be able to get that demand management. I mean, the other one that we may not notice, but we're about to enter probably a very, very active hurricane season. The reason why we all naturally don't look at the last 2 days and we say, well, yesterday was sunny, therefore tomorrow is going to be sunny, which is what traditional business forecasting does, is you look at the past and you project forward.
Yep.
Most of the actual weather projections are based on AI. And we created with the weather company, which is one of the properties of IBM, we created more hyperlocal models to really create predictions based on AI, or for example, what the path of a hurricane is going to be, or how do you improve yielding crops, etc. All of these are uses of AI that you may not normally think of, but it takes this power of the idea of being able to process many different things and being able to predict. It's supposed to just give you a correlation.
And is your AI, is it always Watson?
No, I mean, it's obviously we created Watson and we created a lot of the algorithms, and we have a number of capabilities in Watson that we believe are leading. For example, Project Debater. So the ability for Watson in real time to actually debate a human based on any topic with only 15 minutes of warning.
I would lose. I would lose that contest for sure.
We believe actually, most humans would lose, but not all. So some of those capabilities, we believe we will use Watson if we believe that the capability is leading edge. But in our practice, again, going back to the world is open. We use any other algorithms. We use other companies if they basically have figured out how to have a better proposition or have better data. So what we try to do is we don't start from the technology and go to the purpose. We start from the purpose and then come back to the technology.
Which is good because that probably humanizes it more. Some more data I'm just looking at here. So this, I don't agree with this, but I'm just going to throw some negative stuff on top of this and let you kind of react to it. So PwC says 38% of U.S. Employees, let's say, are at high risk of automating their jobs by 2030. And Forrester predicts that cognitive technologies such as robotics, AI, machine learning, everything we've been talking about, and just automation are going to replace 16%, which I think is not too bad, but by 2025. These seem a little naive because they don't take into account. So, for instance, when you mention robotics, it could be cobotics. I am running something with this robot. It also doesn't seem to talk about what's the upside of AI. What's it going to create? You just brought up a bunch of things that some new jobs I think are going to be created, right?
Exactly. It's not as interesting of a headline. About a year and a half ago, when I was doing a piece of work with the World Economic Forum for the future of work, I looked at all of these studies. I looked at about 15 different studies, and every single study except one, when you actually, they all basically do predict, in the US, it was like 30 million or so jobs that are going to be automated. But every single one of those studies, except one, predicted that the creation of new jobs would exceed those jobs that they're being automated. So the net effect of the 15, 14 of the 15 studies was actually positive. Yet, to your point, is a more interesting headline to just talk about the automation. But the fact of the matter is the majority of those studies, I'm not familiar with those two yet that you mentioned, but I would bet you, if you actually look at that, if you read it in context, they are probably, start talking about the new kind of jobs. What is true is almost every job is going to transform in some way. So almost every job is going to be enhanced by the fact that now you have tools. So think about it. If you're a doctor and you can have a tool that could read 3 million medical papers and give you the synthesis of the 15 areas that may be relevant for this cancer patient. I mean, in 10 years, there should be no oncologist that doesn't use some kind of aid to basically read more, because as a human, you can't, even if you could read 3 million papers, you're not going to retain them, right? So I think every job is going to be transformed by AI. Most of the studies would say the net of the new jobs, and I think there are three categories. There is jobs that will be fully automated. There are jobs that are being transformed, and there are new jobs that they're being created that they don't exist today, like algorithm supervisors, right?
Right.
That's a job that wouldn't exist prior to AI. The net is positive, but it's really very important that we manage this transition, because when you look at it from an individual perspective, the fact that the net is positive is really not that interesting, right? It's like, that's the problem with averages, right? On average, everybody eats. But if you're the one that didn't eat because somebody else ate twice, well, that doesn't please you a lot, the fact that the average everybody ate. So it's really important that we focus on that skill transition and make sure that we prepare the people and that we do it in a very inclusive way, so everybody can participate of this upswing in the same way that they're going to participate in the downswing.
Right. So those two surveys were done just prior to the pandemic, and my guess is those numbers are probably going north because of the digital adoption going on post-pandemic. But let's shift to your own institute. You did an amazing survey of 30,000 consumers, which talks about the impacts of COVID and the impacts of a pandemic. But can you tell us a little about what permanent shifts are you seeing from that data?
Yeah, and that was the goal. This study is specific to the US, so it's not a global study. But the objective was to try to distill not only temporary, but maybe permanent changes in behavior and psychology. Couple of, basically some of the study confirms things that logically you would think, but some of the maybe more surprising elements of the study, I will start with telecommuting. The people who have the benefit that their job, they can telecommute to their job. There's been a lot written as to how everybody has cabin fever, everybody wants to go back. Well, the data doesn't really say that. I have data of June and data of May prior to that. So the data in May basically said that when you actually ask people say, you know what, this telecommute is not that bad. And if given the choice, I would prefer even when I have the ability to return to my normal workplace, I would
Hmm.
prefer to retain the option to telecommute some days. Well, that number is 80% now, so it keeps going up. So the trend of telecommuting, we don't believe is going to be, just like everybody's going to go back to work. Is actually that's going to drive fundamental changes on commercial real estate and what it means for companies. Because a lot of the people actually say, yeah, actually, I would prefer to keep that. Interesting point on automotive, for example, is we looked at the study and we looked at roughly of the 30,000 people, half of them were typical users of like Uber and Lyft, rideshare, and
Right.
half of them would not. But of the typical users that they were, half of them said, I'm not going to use rideshare anymore for the time being. So half of the people said, I'm not going to do that. And 26% of the people said, I'm going to start using my own vehicle exclusively as the mode of transformation. So think about the U-turn from where we
That's a
were
total
just
U-turn from years
five
ago.
5 months ago. I'm not talking about years, 5 months ago. So that was very interesting. Many of them actually is very interesting and they intend to purchase. It's 2 to 1. Like people, if we ask the question, are you going to kind of like wait until everything is calm and then go back to rideshare, or are you going to buy a vehicle? It's 2 to 1. They're saying, no, I'm going to buy a vehicle. But when you ask them when, the majority of them say, well, not earlier than 6 months because of the economic fear. A couple more just to wrap up some of the permanent changes. Telemedicine. The telemedicine use was single digit in January. In May, and the data point that I have in May, 1 in 3 of the people interviewed have actually completed a telemedicine visit. That's 31%. In June, that raised to 40%. And when we asked them, if you have the choice, would you prefer telemedicine to a normal visit? 43% say, I would prefer telemedicine. So think about the massive change in the healthcare sector, where if you don't have a choice of telemedicine, you are not a preferred choice for 43% of the people, which, just in January, that was single digit. So big one. Esports up 500%.
Huge, massive. Yeah.
I think we see a lot of this psychology also. I loved one that people basically say, because we are learning that you're not supposed to touch your face and you're not supposed to touch things. So the no touching is being embedded on the psychology, and is being translated to everything else that we do. So we ask people about methods of payment in retail, and 40% said, I want to adopt contactless payment. So that's a big shift, just because there is nothing wrong with the payment, but just the psychology of not touching things and doing things virtually is basically driving people to change their behavior.
Yeah, that's driving Reviv's business too, whereas the retailers had a lot of tablets and pads and mirror technology in the stores. They basically are now having a hardware hangover. They're pulling those out and just going with people's powerful cell phones, which was always going to be the trend. It's just accelerated even more. So that's
Exactly.
definitely one. Speaking of that, facial recognition and selfies and things, what you guys announced that you're going to kind of pull out of parts of it, facial recognition, and what's the logic behind that?
It's something that we
Given that all
started.
these other, just given that all these other companies are investing so heavily in it, and you have so much technology there.
Yeah, I mean, it's news now, but it's not new news for us. We have been
No.
working on this for over a year. Basically, it became a decision about our values and the values of the IBM company. And then what do you do when technology could be used to go against your values? And so I mean, in terms of what the technology itself, we don't have an issue with the ability to recognize a face. What we have an issue is the potential to misuse the actual personal information that you can get, the individual recognition, and the lack of discipline around imposing bias filters. And
Right.
the fact that, because of the data that trains many of these devices, is not necessarily balanced, because it is not enforced that there is, bias checks in this data, and there are no tripwires that people implement with this technology What we have banned is because we believe there is a high likelihood for the technology to be misused, to do, inappropriate surveillance, or to be misused to do things that we as a company, we would not stand for. So we have been working on this for a year. It's not new news, but given what we're seeing and the sensitivity on the fact that, we have systemic racism in many elements of our societies, we want to make sure we're not one adding to the problem, that we're one on the side of resolving that problem, and that's one of the reasons is
there's
we
also
just
bad
don't want to contribute
actors.
to it.
There's bad actors, military governments, all types of things. So no shortage of things there. Maybe thanks for coming on the program today. Maybe just end up on something a little more. One of my beliefs is this: as AI and technology becomes more invisible, it becomes more human, and things are working for you in the background. So you mentioned smart agents and stuff like that. Whereas right now we tend to kind of still be working for our phone instead of our phone working for us. So what are your thoughts there? How does the future look in terms of, I don't want my phone to have 200 apps on it anymore. I don't even want apps, really. You talk a lot about, humanization of AI and human intelligence. How does that all come together in the next few years? What are our lives going to look like as consumers and people?
Yeah, I mean, I think my belief is the maximum return and the maximum impact is achieved when technology and people work in symbiosis, right? So it's really engineering this this connectivity between the capability of the technology and the people that use it to deliver either a better value proposition or a better experience or more efficiency, whatever that output is. If every study on AI will pretty much show you that if you put AI alone, or if you put the people alone, you get a lower score than when you put the people and AI together, right? So you get a higher score on whatever it is. So that's our belief, and I think part of the challenge is, as a society, we invest a lot in artificial intelligence, and I like the joke of maybe we need to invest as much, if not more, on human intelligence, not just artificial intelligence. And I think that takes 2 or 3 concrete elements. One is how the integration between the person and the technology is done is really important. It is, in my view, more important than the algorithm itself. So how do we put human in the loop? How do we create this, as you said, these interfaces where the technology just follows what you need it to do in a very transparent way, instead of the traditional way, which is, well, let's just give the human a book. You read a manual, you learn the language of the technology, and then you tell the technology what you want to do. I think lifting that burden, AI gives us that capability because of what I said before. AI can actually process things in the same way as humans do. Therefore, it can help you in a more natural way. I think that's one element of it. The other element is the ethics around that. Is, as we said, it is ethical to make sure that we give everybody the opportunity by working on the skills, by making sure that everybody can participate in learning how to use that technology to add value and have a role in that society, as well as the ethics of that interface, is the relationship between technology and people done in such way that you can trust. Because what I fundamentally believe is, if you can't trust some technology, eventually you will not use it. So engineering that technology to make sure that ultimately creates that trust is a key to success of the adoption of that technology, which then becomes a key on the achievement of any goal, whether it's efficiency, performance, value proposition, any of it.
Right. Yeah. Well said. Jesus Mantas, thank you for joining us. You've been listening to a program about AI in the future, and I have a feeling this discussion is not over. So we'll see you soon.
Thank you, Dan. Pleasure.
Ciao.